This is Lehigh Valley Political Pulse. I'm Tom Shortell. After months of campaign promises, donation requests, knocking on doors, and policy debates, Election Day 2025 is upon us. This coming Tuesday, thousands of Lehigh Valley residents will head to the polls to select school board directors, county commissioners, township supervisors, and county executives. Political scientist Chris Borick joins the program today to help us set our expectations for the general election. Thanks for being here, Chris.
It's always a pleasure, Tom.
So turnout for off-year elections is typically paltry, but this year features an unusual Supreme Court retention race. Do you think the heightened spending by the parties will bring more voters to the polls this time around?
Yeah, I do, Tom. I think, and again, with modest expectations, right? We're talking the difference between, for example, last year, this time when we were looking at a presidential election to an off-year election where maybe have a third of the turnout, right? I mean, that's just the reality.
Half for certain.
Yeah. Oh, my gosh. That would be, I think if we got to a half of last year's fall's turnout, it would be a raging success here in the Lehigh Valley and Pennsylvania. But back to your point, which I think is really important. Is there anything different about this cycle that might raise expectations for turnout? And you mentioned the retention races that are going on in the state and that we've talked about before on the show. Have a different type of intensity compared to the past. Lots of ads, lots of mailers. I'm sure people listening have received their groupings of all the things that are out there. And so does that result in more engagement? As a political science perspective, we often see it does modestly move the amount of effort, the amount of reaching out. There's some empirical evidence. You look at the number of mail ballots requested this year compared to 2023 or 2021, and they're up, which is probably a leading indicator that we're going to see. Now, that some of that could just be people voting that way as opposed to day of, so I'm always cautious on it. But back to the key kind of question, I think we'll see turnout modestly increase in this cycle.
Now, not to call you out on anything, but in the past, we've had these conversations, and sometimes like with good intention, like maybe this is going to drive turnout and have more people involved in the races, and we've been wrong about this before.
I'll agree to that, and it's one thing that I think when I look back at how I approach elections and think about elections, it's hard sometimes to start from the likely negative aspect that people aren't going to engage, right? So you probably, there's a bit of motivated reasoning where you think, okay, well, what are like I'm talking about right now with this indicator that I found? Maybe there are counter indicators I'm minimizing because my normative valuation is to say, yeah, I'd like people to turn out for these races. So I'm probably a little guilty of more rose-colored on projections.
Now, we've spoken on this program before about the unique Supreme Court retention races, the spending that's going into it, the stakes that are involved. Pretty much every important decision that we've seen in the last 5 to 10 years theoretically could be redecided if there's a turnover, if there is a change in the makeup on the bench. Is that the most compelling race on the ballot, in your opinion?
Yeah, I would probably say so because of the way you just framed it, Tom. Look, hey, probably people think more about the U.S. Supreme Court than the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. When we've seen changes, just a few individuals, justices on the Supreme Court, we've seen earth-shattering changes in law, right? In reading of cases, reproductive rights. We look at, campaign finance, elections, you name it, right? I mean, the courts have redefined lots of American politics, executive power we're seeing, right? Federalism questions, all kinds of important things. So let's just say that these retention races lead to 3 justices getting no votes. We'd have to go, 2 years from now to a new election for 3 justices, all of them Democrats. That could reshape the nature of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And as you said, in the last 10 years, look at the types of decisions on elections, on reproductive rights questions, all kinds of things we've talked about before. And that could really redefine, how Pennsylvania law is interpreted in the state. So it's hard for me not to lead there. At the same time, I always want to call out the importance of a lot of the other compelling races here happening in the Lehigh Valley, county executive races, mayoral races in our third biggest city in the state and the biggest in the Lehigh Valley, school boards, which are being asked to make more important decisions than ever, I would think, in lots of curricular areas that are part of our nationalized politics. So we've got a deep number of important elections, but if you forced me to think, okay, where am I most interested? The retention races are just so different this year that I'm probably drawn to difference.
We'll get to some of those other ones, so don't worry.
Okay, all right.
But do you think that the rhetoric being used in these retention races will affect the other retention races? For example, in Northampton County, Paula Rossioli, a longtime Northampton County judge, is up for retention. I'm not aware of anyone pounding the table saying you have to get Judge Rossioli off the bench. But that rhetoric that is being used in these Supreme Court races theoretically could trickle down to her race. Should others be nervous about how this race plays out?
Yeah, I think if the mood, and here I'll start with the atmospherics a little bit about this election. If I'm on the no side, I want to advocate for no as the answer for retention races. I'm kind of following with what I would say is the general sense of the mood of the country right now. People are not satisfied with government. We've talked about this all fall. Government doesn't seem to be working. There's distrust with institutions and individuals. Our elected officials, lots of them, including the president, have pretty low approval ratings right now. There's some exceptions we could talk about. So that mood, Tom, that voters are in right now, I think is a no type of mood right now. That doesn't mean that's going to win the day because there's other campaigns matter, right? And I actually think the yes campaign has more compelling arguments, at least that they're making to the public, that I think would resonate more on issues like reproductive rights. So I think there's an advantage there. But so let's just say these three justices, the no sentiment really takes on and it knocks them out. Would there be down ballot effects, as you said, in other retentions? I would have to say probably, because people don't know a lot about. They don't know a lot about the Supreme Court justices. They certainly, as we go down ballot, don't know a lot either. And so that sentiment might kind of start a ripple effect down to those other races.
You mentioned the county executive races, and we have two kind of unusual ones this time around. In Northampton County, we have Democrat Tara Zirinsky, who some might view as a polarizing figure in county politics, and Republican Tom Giovanni, who's not as well known, hasn't raised as much money, has declined to do debates. Is there a favorite in this toss-up county?
It's hard to tell. Again, I like polling, and so I don't have any external public polling on this. There might be internal polling for the candidates or the parties. So what do I look to on a race? As you said, you kind of look at the candidates, where they might stand, where the public might see them, and kind of make some appraisals like you did. And I think that's fair. So what do we look for? So I started with the retention race as kind of the general mood of the public right now. That it's maybe not great for existing government institutions and organizations because people aren't happy. They don't see a lot of functioning going on. And that might go down from federal to state to local evaluations, which are sometimes different. But if I'm in Northampton County and I'm a Democrat, or in Lehigh County, which we talk about, and a Democrat, and people aren't that happy and there's Democratic administrations, I feel like maybe the winds are in my face a little bit for that. Now, you might say, well, a lot of Americans aren't very happy with the Trump administration, and there's kind of energy against that right now that might come together and kind of push counter forces. So when I look at the local races, I always ask myself, in this cycle, would it be easier for me to run as a Democrat or a Republican? That's how I often think about evaluating. I can't really discern a clear wind at the back of a party right now, which means campaigns matter and spending matters and all the other things that we might put in that could really win the day.
In my experience covering Northampton County, so we're talking over a decade, the strongest indicator has often been who's in power in Washington. And the party out of power just about always does better in the local elections. So, as you pointed out, Democrats aren't exactly in great shape nationally either, however. I mean, we're in a government shutdown. Like, how much of that historic play, like, should we be looking at given all the other, I'm going to say, baggage and play at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, it's good to think. I mean, cycles, what I talk about all the time, matter. They certainly give direction, and so I would do what you did too. People ask me, well, how should we look at elections? I say, well, what usually happens in off-year election? That's why when we were talking at the beginning of the conversation about turnout, right? You'd be silly to think it would look dramatically different, even with the dramatically different retention race, than in the past. It should be within kind of the confines of expectations. So when you say like this cycle, I'd go back and say, yeah, historically, if you ask me, new president comes into town, I got to run the next year. That president's approval ratings aren't that great. I'd say, well, having an R right now is probably not going to be the best thing. But it's countered by a Democratic brand that's really struggling nationally. And you have two Democratic administrations in the counties in the Lehigh Valley that you might say, hey, if you're not happy, this is time for change. Change is always a positive. You could say, if you're not happy with things, let's go in a different direction. And Republicans have that at both the county commissioner races this year. So we're seeing competing kind of forces that are playing out in these races, and it makes them a little harder to handicap. And that's why I do come back, though. What do the campaigns look like? How good are they? What do they have? Resources? What kind of things are they doing out there?
So let's look at the Lehigh County executive race then, because in Lehigh County, it's been 20 years since we've had a Republican win the executive race. At the same time, the incumbent Josh Siegel has just spent a near record amount. We're approaching. I wouldn't be surprised if he breaks the record for most money spent in an executive race, but perhaps more polarizing than we just discussed in Northampton County, versus Roger McLean, who has improved his fundraising, but is in a harder. I don't want to say district because it's not a district, but a harder political landscape, but a similar national mood. Is it the same calculus there?
It's a little different. As you said, Lehigh County is more Democratic leaning than Northampton. Northampton's about as purple as you can get in many ways, and Lehigh has over historically been it was historically a pretty Republican place that over the last 20 years has become increasingly Democratic. So it's a different terrain right now for Republicans in county races like this than it was even 10 years ago, right? As you mentioned. So you have to. Do other things matter? Do the candidates kind of, how the public knows them on these smaller level races and what relationships they have? All those things are different at local levels. Maybe money plays a different role at the local level than it would at a statewide race where you have to do much broader kind of outreach to voters. So I'm not discounting any kind of grassroots politics, grassroots evaluations that people make. But boy, the money thing, certainly as an analyst, and the difference between the two candidates in this race is so striking, right? That
it's nearly 10 times more spending.
Yeah, when you put numbers like 10 times as much, and you think, is that going to have an effect? Money we know doesn't dictate the outcome of races, but there's a high correlation between the amount of money spent and who wins, and that's just empirical. And so if I'm looking at that metric and I see that kind of difference, I certainly think of it a significant advantage for Siegel in this case. Could that be overcome by other factors, fatigue with Democratic administrations in Lehigh County? Perhaps, but it's a pretty big hurdle, at least from my perspective.
I'm curious, what lower profile races will you be keeping an eye on Election Day?
Oh, I mean, it would be kind of funny to say lower profile is the city of Allentown, right? I mean, it's our biggest city, third biggest in the state, right? And I'm of course going to be looking at that race. It is one that you would suspect probably won't be all that close, given that Mayor Turk won the Democratic primary against the same person he's running against in the election now, and so
But
you think,
yeah, he defeated Ed Zuckel by a pretty wide margin in the
yeah.
primary.
And so I'll just be interested to see things like, what kind of is it an overwhelming victory for him, and then that kind of he coast to victory and can claim, as elected officials will do, I got a clear mandate for my second term here. I'm ready to roll. Or is there kind of some lower turnout and maybe some protest votes there for Zuckel that make it look less impressive? And what do you make of that moving forward? Those races certainly could. We're talking about Pennsylvania and Lehigh Valley. I'm a political scientist, so my eyes are all over the place. I'm looking across the river this year to your home land of New Jersey, and a big governor's race over there. That's
Sure.
got a lot of my attention moving in this cycle, because we're always looking to the next election, right, Tom? And we're trying to discern what might be coming down the road, right? And these local elections certainly will put into perspective, including school districts and all those races that are really, really important. But also, what do we make of a big governor's race in a state that's usually blue but turned a little redder last year and might have some fatigue with the Democratic leadership there? So lots to look at.
That's Muhlenberg College political scientist Chris Borick. This has been Lehigh Valley Political Pulse. I'm Tom Shortell. Polls will be open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. on Tuesday. If you're in line to vote when the polls close, stay in line. Mail-in ballots must be in the possession of election officials or a drop box by 8 p.m. or they will not be counted.